And welcome to Catholics Coast to Coast, another chance where I, Ace McKay, get to dive into what's happening and what's really to be heard at Podcast Central when you go to EWTN.com/podcast, or as you find some of your favorites, you can always subscribe and put them wherever you already stream. That way you don't miss future episodes. As we dive in, though, we always love to get into more of our Easter reflections as we continue with this week's Word on the Word.
Hi, I'm Veronica.
And I'm Melissa. Welcome to the Word on the Word. Today, we're going to look at Sunday's Gospel from John chapter 13.
Jesus gives us a new commandment at a pinnacle moment in his life. He's just announced that he will be betrayed by one of the 12.
Let's break it down.
The Gospel starts off with Jesus stating that the Son of Man and God are now glorified at once. He also says that he'll only be with the apostles for a little while longer, and where he's going, they cannot follow.
I've always wondered how the apostles felt when they heard this. Their confusion, their dedication to the Messiah whom they put all their faith in.
And then he adds a new commandment: love one another as I have loved you.
Just think, when the apostles heard this, they had no idea what Jesus was talking about. Jesus was about to give his life, not just for them, but for all mankind, to save everyone, even me and you, from sin and death.
Growing up, my parish would host a Knights of Columbus Council who would recreate Leonardo da Vinci's Last Supper. And it was so cool. They posed just like each person in the painting. Then, one by one, the actor would break from their pose to tell the personal story of the apostle they were portraying, based on scriptural accounts. You know, as a kid, I thought it was such a long event because they told each story. But growing older, I really learned to appreciate each perspective.
This week, we challenge you to think about how the apostles felt when they heard this new commandment to love one another as I have loved you, especially the next day after almost all of Jesus' followers abandoned him at the cross.
And catch us next week here on EWTN.
Bye.
Toodles.
More on this weekend's readings from the Mass as you look into ones you might have missed. Easy to do. Just click on Word on the Word when you go to Podcast Central at EWTN.com/podcast, or subscribe to Word on the Word wherever you stream now. I am Ace McKay. As we continue with Catholics Coast to Coast, let's just cozy up to just a guy in the pew, because whether it's past mistakes, broken relationships, or personal struggles, shame can leave all of us feeling unworthy, isolated, and stuck. But there's hope by turning to humility and running towards Jesus, much like Peter. As we join John and Vector in the pew this week, we're going to find out how to unpack the difference between guilt and shame with this week's Just a Guy in the Pew on Catholics Coast to Coast.
Well, welcome back to the pew, everybody. I'm your host, John Edwards, and here across the table from me, as always, is my co-host and cohort, Victor Adams.
John, I want to thank you for my paid sabbatical. I really appreciated the rest and recovery of really just kind of being able to read books and just kind of just focus on myself.
Victor, as we said, this is really the first episode we've been able to do together since Easter began, since we got through Holy Week. And I was just kind of going through things and looking at where things are. And something that's come up a lot in my last couple trips when I've been speaking or at these leadership summits, on breaks, a lot of times guys will come up and they sort of pull me aside and say, hey, can I talk to you for a minute?
Yeah.
And a lot of times they have a tear in their eye, and I know it's going to be something they're dealing with that they're struggling with, whether it's, hey, I'm having trouble in my marriage, or I'm struggling with pornography, or I'm isolated and alone. There's a lot of very common things, but a lot of what I hear too from men, and a lot of what I've experienced in my own life, and I know you have in yours too, is a lot about shame. Mm-hmm. Guys have done things they're not proud of. They've made mistakes. They've experienced failures in their life, or something's been done to them. They've been wounded either by themselves or someone else. And so they experience a lot of shame, right? And shame is a very hard and difficult thing. And it's something that we all have in common. I don't know anybody I've ever met that hasn't experienced shame in some way. And so like some people will say, well, is that guilt or is it shame? There's a difference in the two. I mean, guilt is obviously a remorse of something, feeling bad for something and feeling uneasy about something you've done. Shame is where you allow those feelings and that emotion to sort of permeate your entire being. And then it's not about a mistake you made. It becomes you are the mistake, right? And that everything you do is a mistake, and you lose your value and you become worthless through that. And so like, I want to make sure that we're defining this in a very Catholic way. So I looked up through some different resources of Catholic places that talk a lot about healing and restoration and shame. And this is really what I kind of a mix of what I came up with is shame is a complex and often painful emotion that arises from a perception of being flawed or inadequate. It encompasses a negative evaluation of the self as a whole. So like now all of a sudden I see myself negatively in everything that I do, not just this one thing, but now everything I am is bad and not good and not lovable. And so it goes on to say, it tends to isolate the individual from God and from others, and it makes us feel unworthy of love, forgiveness, and acceptance. So shame, honestly, sort of summing that up, seeks to make you believe that you're no better than your mistakes and that your mistakes are what define you, and self-condemnation follows, and ultimately a loss of grace. Because what do? Just like Adam and Eve, as soon as they made the mistake and realized it, they hid in the bushes and they started to cover themselves because of shame. And that's often what we do. And so this week I thought about, like, so many people ask me how to deal with my shame, and there's so many different answers for this. There's so many different ways to be able to do that. And obviously, like consulting people at the JP2 Healing Center or other places like Encounter Ministries and things like that out there have a lot on this. The saints talk about it, but the funny thing is, Victor, like whenever these questions seem to arise and I start to ponder them over, God never leaves us abandoned, right? Like he always shows up with some sort of thing to reflect on, and that brings me in my experience to places where I'm like, man, this is exactly where I am. This is exactly where somebody that spoke to me is right now. And this is the Lord trying to show me an answer to this. It may not be the whole answer, but it's a beginning, right? And so this episode's called A Remedy for Shame because the other day I was reading the gospel and trying to keep up with the daily readings and reflections and trying to keep this wonderful place I've sort of been in with my family as we've come off of a great Lent and a powerful Triduum, is now to enter into that in the Easter season. So I was reading this, and I found some wisdom in Peter, and an example in John 21 from like last Friday or a week or so ago. And so I want to get into that and talk about like how in this particular scripture example, which can be used for a lot of different things, but the Lord kind of shined a light on shame and a remedy for it today. And so I know you probably have some thoughts on shame too. So I'd love for you to jump in here and kind of comment on that before we get into the example.
Well, and piggybacking off that, obviously it's, shame is something that, if we're not careful, will color ourselves as in a negative way, where we feel ourselves unworthy, unable to be loved, unwilling to participate in life. It may be turned to something to soothe us, which are probably not the best way to do it, and that's where addiction usually comes in. So, shame is something that has to be very carefully not to be controlled in your life. And what that means is that, you're talking about Adam and Eve, how much shame they had. They were forced to leave paradise, and they had to live in a life where they had to provide for everything themselves rather than God providing for them. So you can imagine how much that was on them day to day when they told their children, hey, this is the story of our origins, and then of course the whole issue between Cain and Abel, where they mourned the loss of a son, and then another loss of the son because who fled. So you can imagine like that instance caused so much like fear, shame, abandonment issues, all these things that we all experience as humans in one form or the other, depending on the heightened of what that level is. Yeah. But we have to be very careful to know that when shame hits a certain point where we're self-destructive, we have to realize that we are loved. Yeah. God created us for a purpose and reason. He doesn't make mistakes. And that's when I think God really is more present. Not to say he's never present in our life, but he's more present when we're in our abject depravity or poverty of our self-worth. Yeah. Where we have no idea what to do. We have no concept of who we are. We have no idea what the truth is in our life because we listen to everybody else. Yeah, and label us. So, this is kind of like leads into like the whole biblical story of faith, of believers, of like saying, "I love you." God saying, "I love you." You have a purpose, just live in the will that I have set for you. And as we know, when we don't live in God's will, then therefore guilt comes in.
Yeah.
And then if we blame ourselves for everything that happens, then that shame gets part of ourselves. So yeah.
No, it does. And that's one of the things that, like, when I love about the readings that always come after Easter, especially the tail end of John and then into Acts, because we see this great loss of Christ and the people that followed him and failed him in a lot of ways by running and abandoning him and leaving, and no more so greater than Peter, right? I mean, obviously Judas betrayed Christ, but Peter stood there, denied him, all those things. And you can just imagine the shame that he felt. And I think that's why so many people, all of us, we can relate to Peter because we see his great moments and his failing moments.
He wasn't at the cross,
right?
Because of that shame, yeah.
Yeah, and so we see, like, often how he can, the ups and downs of Peter, which is very relatable to all of us. It should be, because we all can experience that. But, like, I love in John 21 when they're kind of sitting around after Jesus died, and they're like, well, what are we going to do? And then Peter said, I'm going fishing. And they all said, well, we're going to go with you. And so they go out, they fish all night. It says they were tired, they didn't catch anything. And then the next morning when dawn breaks or whatever, they're going along the shore and they see, somebody in white walking. And all of a sudden the man says, throw your nets over the side. And they do, they catch all these fish. And we see Peter, a moment after he does it, John sort of screams, it is the Lord. And Peter, in his rashness, jumps off, swims straight to the beach. And then we know the Lord gives him an opportunity there to sit with him and to be forgiven, to really be told that he's loved, and to be called back into his rightful place as the rock and as our first pope there in that scene. But what I really found about this is, like, it was really impactful because I've read this a million times like everybody else has, right? I've read this and read it. But in this particular time, in dealing with shame, something really struck me. I was reading a reflection, and the priest said in the reflection, deep down inside in this moment, Peter, when he dove off the boat, when he saw it was the Lord, with all that shame that was in him, all that just, you could just imagine how he must have been like, man, not only did I deny him, I denied him while he was looking at me. I was supposed to be his rock. I was supposed to be there, and I ran. And even as I followed him, I followed at a distance, and I didn't stay by his side, and I let him go through all of this. And then he looked at me as I denied him. So imagine carrying all that. But then in this moment, like, you would think Peter would just, like, hey, turn the boat the other way and go the other way when he finds out it's Jesus. Like, I don't want to see him. I don't want to deal with this. Like, he's going to be so disappointed in me. But instead, what does he do? Like, he just tucks in his clothes, doesn't even strip, and then, like, jumps in the water and swims immediately to Jesus. He runs to him instead of running away from him.
Right.
And I never really thought about that before. Like, how I saw how anxious he was. I was like, well, Peter's always been brash, right? Like, so he just was like, I got to get there now. And even though he might have been 10 feet from the shore. But really what that priest opened my eyes to was, like, something deep inside of Peter said, if I'm going to deal with this shame, I can't run away from Jesus. I need to run towards him. And how often is that our reaction, Victor, to where, like, things happen, we do things we don't want to do, and you know what? We don't go to confession. We don't go to mass because we don't go to confession, and we don't want to deal with it. And maybe it's the same thing we've been doing over and over again. So our shame is feeling like, I don't want to go in there and tell this priest again that I've fallen to watching something I shouldn't have and been impure with myself, or that I drank too much again, or that whatever your sins are, whatever your repetitive sin is, the shame comes in that way, and we want to avoid these things. But Peter shows us in the moment that he chooses to run right towards him. So the question to ask is, like, what really happened? What really changed in Peter? What is it that happened to Peter to make him realize I need to run to Jesus? When, quite honestly, Victor, for so long in the Gospels, we see Peter being obstinate, being self-reliant, sort of always not barking back at Jesus, but responding in a way of, like, sometimes disagreeing with Jesus or argumentative with Jesus. And so that's the kind of the thing I want to talk about is, like, this remedy for shame that Peter found. What is it, and how can it help us?
Right. It could have been where his heart was so overwhelmed with sorrow, so with weight of, like, disappointment, that he was finally led by his heart rather than his head, or by his anger, by his emotions. And this is probably the first time where Peter changes to be Peter the Rock, just, I'm loving Jesus. I have to. If I can't love him, then there's nothing I can do in this life. And I think that's what we all are in the same sense, is that once we let God into our heart, Christ live in our hearts, then guess what? We're all synced up to the same rhythm of faith. Like the heartbeat, like love God, praise God, love God, praise God. It's like, and all of us in the whole world, our heartbeats are all synced up in the sense, because not only God gives us life, but he lives within us, and our heart sings, and our heart seeks to change the world rather than to change the world for myself, for my own comfort. And that's the shift I think Peter we're seeing, is that he is just he's being led by his heart. He's being led by love rather than like, well, I don't want to seem like I'm, I'm the leader and I got to be careful what I do. He's just like, I'm going to be the example of love.
Yeah, I definitely think there was a change in his heart. And I think that change was Peter finally found humility, right? Like, because here he is probably sitting in that room and after Jesus died thinking like, I ran from him and now I'm in this place. What if I had just run to him, right? What if I had just run to him? Yeah, I may have died, but I would have also have been there with him. Like what if I had just run to him? And if I only had a chance to
he
do it
was
again?
going through those scenarios of like, why did I say no? Why did I deny him? What was wrong with me? Why? I love this man. I followed this man for 3 years.
Yeah.
You're right. I mean, it's like, I'm sure he was going over and over to exhaustion. Like, what happened? Why did I say
Yeah, and I
that?
bet he was sitting there waiting, like, if I just had another chance, if I just had another chance, I would run to Jesus. I wouldn't do what I've done. I would give him everything, because look what trying to go it on my own has done for me. Look at what choosing myself has done for me, right? And we talked last week in the episode I put out about the battle of two loves, self-giving love versus love of God. And so Peter's sort of in the same spot of like, I cared more about myself than I did him in the moment, and I denied him. Self-preservation, self-reliance, all those things. So now you look at this, and Peter's found humility, and the only way that I think that he found humility was going through everything that he had to go through, right? And Jesus sort of alludes to this earlier in the Gospels in Luke 22, verses 31 through 32. So he tells Simon, Peter, Simon at the time, he says, Simon, Simon, behold, Satan demanded to have you, that he might sift you like wheat. But I have prayed for you, that your faith may not fail. And when you have turned again, strengthen your brothers. So it's almost like Jesus is saying, look, here's what's happened. The devil's demanded to have you. You're going to fall and you're going to fail, right? Because you're going to do what men do. You're going to choose yourself over me, right? But when you have gotten back up again, strengthen your brothers. Now we're seeing the point of Peter getting back up. What does it mean to get back up? It means that I need to humble myself and surrender and go to the Lord. That's what getting back up means. That's what it means when you go to confession, you receive the Lord's mercy, and you get back into grace again, in a state of grace with the Lord. That is getting back up, but it takes humility for us to get to that point. And I think Peter found this, because if you look at it, what is humility? It's coming to understand that I'm nothing without God, that I can't fix myself, that I need Jesus. It's the awareness that I'm totally dependent on him. And this is one of the toughest and hardest lessons that we ever have to learn as a Christian, is that I can't do it myself. I need Jesus. And so Peter, I think, began to figure this out after his denial of Christ. He had been so self-reliant and so dependent for so long that he had chosen himself over Christ, and he comes to his wit's end. Like, every time I've chosen myself, look what's happened. Every time I've said something or done something contrary to what Christ has said, I wound up in some place. And you see that in some of the other scriptures, like when he first called Peter, he says to him, he says, put out into the deep and let your nets down for a catch, in Luke 5, 4 and 5. And what does Simon say? Master, we toiled all night and we took nothing. Like, I hear you, man, but I know what I'm doing. I've fished all my life. You're some sort of preacher. Like, you leave my business to me and you handle your business. And what does he do? Right after, he says, all right, whatever you want. And he pulls in these fish. But in the beginning there, when Jesus called Peter, he was very self-reliant. He was very obstinate. We see later on in other verses, when Jesus says, who do you say that I am? And Peter says, you're the Son of God. You're the Christ. You're the Messiah. And Jesus says, human knowledge didn't reveal this to you. It was the knowledge from my Father. And so now I'm going to call you Cephas. I'm going to call you the rock. and on this rock I'll build my church, and the gates of hell will never prevail against it. Well, that happens, and great for Peter, a great moment for Peter. Seconds later, God forbid, Lord, because Jesus says, I'm going to have to die. And Peter says, God forbid, Lord, this shall never happen to you. And then Jesus turned to him and said, get behind me, Satan. You are a hindrance to me, for you are not on the side of God, but of men. And that's Matthew 16, 22 through 23. So again, we see where Peter is choosing this self-reliance and this knowledge of himself and not really listening to the Lord. He almost thinks he knows a better way. And so then again, what does he say that we just saw in Lent, right? On Holy Thursday, in the washing of the feet, Jesus starts to wash feet, and Peter's like, you're never going to wash my feet. And Jesus looks at him and is like, if you don't let me do this, you can't be with me.
Yeah, no part of me. Yeah.
And so again, even though Peter figures it out, he's constantly in this grip, this battle, this tug of war with the Lord about what the Lord says is right and what Peter thinks is right. And so he struggles through all of this. And then finally, at the Last Supper, we see him when Jesus says, truly I say to you, he's telling them he's going to die again. This is my last night with you. And Peter says, Lord, no, it can't be true. And Jesus says, truly I say to you this very night, before the cock crows, you will deny me 3 times. And Peter says, even if I must die with you, I will not deny you. Right? He says this before that. He looks at him, and after Jesus says this, he says this first. Though they all fall away because of you, I will never fall away. And that's when Jesus says, hey, look, I'm going to tell you the truth. You're going to deny me before the rooster crows 3 times. And even then, Peter says, even if I must die with you, I will not deny you. That's Matthew 26, 33 through 35. So we see all these points where Peter kept going like, I know better than you, or there's a different way, or, and whether he meant to or not, he was just sort of refusing to surrender to the Lord. He was refusing to be humble and just to listen. He thought he had a better idea. And so that translated into when the time came to deny him, he chose himself over God. But here he is in this place where he sees Jesus again, and this time, he doesn't argue. Like we said a minute ago, Victor, like he's just going down the beach, and this guy who he doesn't even recognize as Jesus yet says, hey, buddy, guys, why don't you throw the net on the other side? And he goes, okay. And they do it, and they pull in the fish. And that's when John goes, it is the Lord.
Yeah.
And then that causes Peter in that moment to dive in, to swim, and to chase after Jesus. And that's the thing. Like he heads straight for Jesus. And this is the point of the whole episode. Like that humility is a direct response to that shame. It's a remedy for that shame. It's the way when we go, I'm feeling shameful. Look at what I've done. I'm nothing more than this. It is a call to go, you know what? I've made a mistake, but that mistake doesn't define me. And I need to go to my Lord no matter what state I'm in. And that's what Peter did. And that's what he shows us, is that humility is an opportunity to combat the shame that we feel in our life.
Yeah. Oh, well, I mean, in going back to that moment, not only is it so profound, a change for Peter's, I guess, personality, but also it doesn't really say he speaks to God. He just sits there with Jesus, looking at him face to face.
Yeah.
And it's almost as if Jesus can just feel from his eyes, his whole body language, like, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I denied you. I'm sorry I left you. I'm sorry I wasn't with you by the cross like John was. I'm sorry I wasn't there to support and help your mom when you were dying. It's like it seems like he wasn't really part of much of the whole the passion. He may have been in the crowd. We don't know. But
yeah, he was. Yeah, it doesn't say that he was at the cross.
Right.
I mean, we know that he was with him up till he denied him.
Right, and so we just don't know where he was. Obviously, he was probably, like you said, bound with shame, and just apart from the disciples, in some sense, because he was trying to figure out what's going on. What is all this happening right now? Overwhelmed. But going beyond that to just by sitting in with Jesus with a charcoal fire, which just for him is like old times.
Yeah,
which is him and Jesus and the small few.
Well, he's bringing him back to the moment he denied it,
right?
Around a charcoal fire. Yeah,
and that's what I was saying. He's leading them into that confessional. But,
yeah,
yeah,
because they are, and they were. I mean, most of the apostles, I think. I mean, biblically, they all returned to the upper room and hid there, scared. But like. This is the thing that Peter starts to figure out is like, the important part is he realizes through humility every time I've chosen myself, every time that I've done something or spoken contrary to the Lord, I've wound up away from him. I've wound up at odds with him.
Self-destructive.
And so now I'm finally have a chance again that I didn't think I might get. And now I'm going to run to the Lord. And like I said, Victor, all of us, we feel inside the shame. The devil's in your ear and he's telling you the Lord doesn't love you. The Lord's not going to forgive you. You're never going to be able to overcome the things that were done to you or that you've done to someone else or to yourself, right? You are unlovable. You are despicable. And God will never have a place for you again. And we listen to that wrong voice and it drowns out the voice of the Lord and the truth of the relationship between God the Father and us as beloved children. Jesus is here to restore and reconcile that. And so in this moment, he does that for Peter. He brings him back into right relationship. And Peter starts to understand in his humility, from all the lessons he's learned, he's finally learned to be humble and surrender. So I'm just going to dive in with reckless abandon and place myself before the Lord no matter what happens, no matter what way he treats me or anything like that. I know that no matter what comes of this, I have to go to him. And so he goes to him and because he knows he's nothing without him. Right. And that's the thing that we all have to start to understand. So as you alluded to, what happens? Jesus isn't sitting there with a whip. He's not sitting there with a paddle. He's not sitting there with handcuffs, right? He's not sitting there, giving Peter something to, hey, why don't you just take your own life? Because like you're a waste of space. Which we often feel and can hear in our own shame from the devil. He looks at him and like you said, Peter doesn't really even say anything. And Jesus starts asking questions. Do you love me? Do you love me? Do you love me? And Peter answers those and twice in a way that the Lord is still looking for more. And finally, Peter gets it right at the end when he says, I love you more than anything. He says, feed my sheep, right? And eventually he says, follow me, right? And then he says, you will follow me all the way to a place you don't want to go. And he's alluding to Peter eventually following in his footsteps, being crucified. But like Jesus forgave Peter and set him back on the path to following him and becoming the person he was always meant to be. Like those mistakes that Peter made, those times where he spoke contrary to the Lord, when he denied him 3 times, that didn't define Peter. That wasn't the end of his story. That wasn't the end of his life. That was just a sentence on a paragraph on a page in his story. And Jesus is trying to illuminate all of that to us in this gospel reading with Peter. That's why I love that it's stuck there in John. You don't see it in the other gospels. And you come to that final gospel, right? As you're about to enter into Acts and you see like what's going to happen with Peter and the apostles when Pentecost comes and the Holy Spirit falls upon him. But this defining moment was when Peter got his mojo back, when he got back into right relationship and he received the grace of the Lord again. And I believe it's placed there for us because we can also look at our own mistakes and we can always think, this is my story. I'll never be more than this. This is just what it's always going to be. I'm never going to find joy. I'm never going to find peace. I'm never going to be lovable. I'm never going to be able to be forgiven. And it's all a lie. And that's what Jesus is trying to show Peter, and that's what he's trying to show all of us, right? He became the man he was always meant to be because he chose to be humble instead of being prideful and going back and thinking about nothing but his own shame, and that God wasn't big enough to overcome anything he had done or anything that he felt because of what he'd done. In his pride he was led to, it was actually into despair, shame and despair, which was a sin against humility. But Peter finds that humility and he goes back to Jesus and he's put back in the right place. And this is the beauty of it. Shame is a terrible thing to feel, but shame can also be an invitation to accept Christ's love and mercy. And the only requirement was that Peter learned humility. That's the only requirement for us to transform the shame, is to take it in humility to the Lord, let him tell us how much he loves us, how much he forgives us, and let him look at us as he says, begin again. Get up off the mat and let me take you back to the right relationship with the Father and put you back on the course of what I made you to do. So that's our requirement as well, right? Humility is the only requirement to get out of your shame, right? Yes, there's healing. Yes, there's work that needs to be going into your wounds. You need to look at that and spend time there, but it never starts until you're humble enough to look past your shame and say, you know what? It's not about me. It's about the Lord and what he wants for me and what he can do for me.
We can find healing, restoration, and peace no matter what we've done. And we know that we can go beyond that as we reach out for God's love. Great stuff this week from Just a Guy in the Pew. You want more on this conversation or others like it? Go to podcast Podcast Central. EWTN.com/podcast is the easiest way, or subscribe to Just a Guy in the Pew wherever you stream and listen now. I'm Ace McKay. We're going to take a quick break, but when Catholics Coast to Coast returns, the Catholic Gentleman exploring how to navigate major life transitions, whether you're building enduring relationships or maintaining family priorities amid professional demands. We'll find out more as John is going to talk to Joe Hart, the author of Take Command, on conquering the fixed mindset that paralyzes many men. More on the Catholic Gentleman when Catholics Coast to Coast returns.
If it's central to the faith, you can find it on EWTN Podcast Central, featuring the best of EWTN radio, as well as faith-filled podcasts from our friends and affiliates across the nation, all in one place, all free. The destination for great Catholic audio programming is EWTN Podcast Central. It's like podcast heaven. Visit EWTN.com/radio/podcasts today.
Hey everyone, so excited to be here with Joe Hart. We are here at the FIO booth inside of the Young Catholic Professionals National Summit. Joe, it's an honor to have you here. I'm so grateful that you joined me in this conversation. Now, you are coming up on almost 10 years, if I looked at your LinkedIn correctly, being president and CEO of the Dale Carnegie organization, which is huge. But this is an international organization. It's been around for over 100 years. Yet nevertheless, 10 years is still a long time, and so I want to set the stage, hearing from you, what's motivating you? What keeps you going every single moment of the day, and what is just the passion that's driving you to keep on doing what you're doing after 10 years?
Well, first of all, John, thank you for having me on your show. I'm glad to be with you and honored to be with you. Dale Carnegie is an incredible company, and I know you and I were talking previously that I took the program and it truly changed my life. Yeah. So when I was a young lawyer and I took a Dale Carnegie course, it really helped me develop a much greater level of empathy and interpersonal skills and caring for other people, and also a different vision for myself. If it wasn't for taking Dale Carnegie as a young lawyer, I wouldn't have probably left the practice of law or started my own company. And so Dale Carnegie has been such an important life-changing part of who I am that when I had the opportunity to become the CEO in 2015, it was really almost like I kind of think about it like the kid who grows up watching the Yankees and then he finds himself on the pitcher's mound one day, you know. And but for me, it's a passion, it's a mission. I know the impact that our programs have on people around the world. I've traveled all over the world and I've seen it. People will come to me and they'll say, I took a Dale Carnegie course 20 years ago, 30 years ago, it changed my life. So, part of what drives me and fuels me is the reality that we all have potential. We've all got abilities and things that we can do that sometimes we don't even realize. And the Dale Carnegie programs can be a pathway to helping people discover those. And we've done it, as you said, for 113 years this year. 113 years. Wow. Yeah, and I've been honored to be a part of it for the last 10. So that's been pretty incredible for me.
Well, where is the Dale Carnegie organization at right now, and where is the plans for its future? And that you're leading it, right? And I've heard you navigated through COVID and you accelerated to the online program. Like, all of these different things are just remarkable, but what's the future now?
Well, I think the future, frankly, has never been better. I'm really excited about it. We are a global franchise organization. We've got 200 operations. We're in 86 countries. Almost all of our operations are franchised, meaning that we've got people in every region who live in that region, speak the language or of the culture and so forth, and that is in all of those different countries. And part of what's happened over the years is our company has come together in an incredible way. We truly are one Carnegie organization operating as one company to really help our clients around the world meet whatever their needs are. So they might have people who are working remotely or in person or both, or they may have people with cross-generational issues. You've got 5 generations in the workplace, John, which is really incredible. And people often see things differently. You've got people who many times who have become managers and they really don't know how to lead. They were great individual performers, but now they need leadership skills. So as I look at the needs in the workplace and how dynamic the world is, and frankly, in many ways, how polarized it is and how we need to come together and have really powerful interpersonal skills, We as a Dale Carnegie, I think, are very well situated. And the one other thing that is we haven't talked about yet is, what does AI do to this? Where is AI in the equation? And I actually think that certainly in the near term, what it's going to do is to create opportunities for people. You and I, we're all going to have to really focus on being more competitive individually and making sure that we've got really stronger social skills, creative skills, interpersonal skills, communication skills, because those are the things that are really going to be at a premium at an age where AI is automating other kinds of things that maybe were more administrative or more repetitive kind of parts of our roles. So as a global company, I'm super excited about the future.
Yeah, there's so much. And hopefully we'll get time to come back to AI. I do want to lean into something that you bring up in your book and something that in my ministry is constant, this fear of failure. It comes up in the lives of men and women all the time. I was just meeting at Easter with my 20-year-old nephew, and I just asked him, I was like, so what's concerning you? And in a very 20-year-old way, he said, I just don't want to screw it all up. And so I pose that to you and say, how do you get started with somebody that is having these this fear of the unknown, this fear of future? And I know that not only did Dale bring it up so well in How to Stop Worrying and Start Living, but you bring it up in Take Command. And so somebody's in their 35, they are likewise feeling like they're going to screw it up as a father. You've got a 20-year-old who feels like, where do you start with somebody like that?
Well, first of all, I think it's the recognition. We can easily forget, right? I think when we were younger and we are trying to find our footing, we have a natural insecurity in terms of what we do and a natural fear that everything seems so big. And in fact, John asked me today, it's like if I were to give myself a 21-year-old version of myself advice, what's the one piece of advice I'd give? I'd probably say, don't worry.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I think about all the things I used to worry about when I was younger. And so recognizing, you know, I'm older than you are, and you're older maybe than your nephew was, and so forth. But that's a natural place, and really to try to pour into them that, you know, life is great. And how do you define failure? If failure is, I tried to do this and I didn't achieve the result, I mean, we're going to fail all the time. That's not necessarily a bad thing, you know, but if I say failure is something that I'm not going to view it that way. I'm going to view it as, what can I learn from this? And then really I minimize what failure is. I say, I mean, if I think about all the different things that I set out to do that didn't work out the way that I wanted to, if I viewed those as a failure, I'd probably be depressed. On the other hand, if I say to myself, my gosh, I've learned so much. This is all part of God and the experience kind of equipping me to deal with things and to grow. And that's really what this is about, right, John? I mean, we know that. It's about how do we help ourselves grow? How do we help other people grow?
Yeah. Oh, great. And let's just keep on down this pathway here, because I really like it how you bring it up here in Take Command, where you're taking command of your thoughts. You've just kind of alluded to that, and your emotions. And I'd love for you to just explain that to me and to our listeners.
Well, the biggest challenge I think we all have, in fact, this is something someone asked Dale Carnegie, hey, what's the most important thing you've ever learned in your life? And he said, the most important thing is the value of what we think. If I know what you think, I know who you are, and our lives are what our thoughts make it. So sometimes we don't even pay attention to the fact that we may be thinking a certain way or have a certain point of view or a certain mindset that limits us or holds us back, or that we say things to ourselves. And so the first recognition of this is to say, I need to be aware, number one, of what I'm thinking and what my thoughts are. And the second thing that Dale Carnegie talked about is that we have the right and the ability to choose our thoughts. So when we choose the right thoughts, we're on the road to solving all of our problems. So, you know, if I wake up in the morning, and this happens constantly, right? You check your email or you go to social media and you see something there that might be like, oh my gosh, this day is going to be horrible. I've got this guy, he's just at it again. It's like, time out. What is my thought process here? Am I seeing this the right way? Where's the opportunity here, right? So I can pull myself back. And also, you know, we were talking about this even yesterday at the workshop that we had. What are the undermining thoughts we have? Someone says, I could never do this.
Yes.
I'm too old to do this. I'm too young to do this. I don't have time to do this. If those are our thoughts, then they're going to limit us in anything that we do. On the other hand, if we could reframe those thoughts, then it can unleash the ability within us to take action. And that's ultimately what I think, if we want to be successful, action is a core part of that.
How do we move past knowledge, like we just are talking about, and into actual practical uses? So, and I've experienced it myself, so be the first person to jump in and put myself into this camp here, where I know I have these negative, limiting, fixed thoughts, right? And I know that I need to work past them. And I do good for a day or two, and then it falls off. And so the framework that I have, or the framework that somebody might have, is insufficient to carry us through in the long run, right? To help really change our neural pathways, right? To where we can start thinking more positively. I'd love to dive in just a little bit deeper there. And how do you speak to somebody who's like, yes, I know this, but I still can't do it, right?
Yeah.
They're still having that fixed.
It's a great question, and it's something I think everyone struggles with. And the analogy I think that people can relate to is exercise. If I said to myself, I want to be fit, say, I like to run marathons.
Yeah.
If I said I want to run a marathon, but I'm not willing to do the training. I mean, there's daily training, there's weekly training, there's monthly training. If I'm going to find myself at the starting line of this race, I've got to prepare. But there's a certain discipline in that. And it's the same way with our thoughts. If I am aware of my thoughts and I create a time to focus on changing an underlying thought, I do it once or twice, but I don't come back to it, why would I expect that that's going to change? These are habits, habitual ways of thinking. We're trying to create mindsets that become habitual to help us as opposed to habitual to hurt us. So one question I would ask to someone is, do you have a routine? What is your routine? How do you create space every day, even a little bit, 5 minutes, 10 minutes to think about, where you are, what went well today, what did not go well, what do you want to change? Do I create space to be intentional? So for me, the first 30 to 45 minutes of every day is doing that. Part of it for me is it's deeply wrapped up into prayer. I spend that time praying, but I might look back and say, okay, so, and you're familiar with the Ignatian exercises and
yes.
the concept of examine and saying, okay, so what do I have to be grateful for? Where is the Holy Spirit working in my life? But also just from a pure practical sense, what do I need to change? What went well? And so forth. And so that's really, having that space is the start of creating a habit. But there's a daily discipline. And that, again, no one's going to be perfect. You're going to have a bad night's sleep or a bad day, or maybe you don't do it in the morning, but you miss a couple days. But it's the ability to pick ourselves up and keep on saying, I have to be intentional about how I think, about how I grow, about my emotions, and so forth. And if I don't create that space, it's very, very difficult to happen on its own.
That's so good. It's that rule of life.
Men, it is the month of May, which is also the month of Mary inside of the church. And as such, for all new Catholic Gentlemen Plus annual subscriptions, I'm able to offer you this incredible Catholic Gentleman Rosary. This is a rosary that is designed by Jonathan Conrad and his team over at Catholic Woodworker, just for the Catholic gentleman. It has St. Joseph the Worker on one side. It has the three hearts of Jesus, Mary, and Joseph on the other side. It has the pardon crucifix. It is incredibly strong, very masculine. I love it. Put 9 months into it. You also get all of the great content that we have inside of Catholic Gentlemen Plus. There are 27 sessions exclusively for men, going to the heart of what it means to be a man today. We break it up into three main categories. That's self-mastery. That's all the struggles that we're dealing with. Relationships, how to be a better husband, father, son, friend. We also go into our spiritual life with things such as fasting, prayer and work, our Blessed Mother, and many others. We have guest experts like Father Donald Calloway, Father Ambrose Christ, Devin Shad, Jason Craig, incredible men that are all just in the mission to help you and to help men grow in masculinity and grow in holiness in 2025 and beyond. We've got some great sessions coming out. We've got some mini courses coming out. So if you head over to CatholicGentlemanPlus.com, it is the best way to support the Catholic Gentleman. You're going to get that Saint Quote book. You're going to get this incredible rosary, and you're going to get exclusive access to everything inside of Catholic Gentleman Plus. Just thinking about it, we also give you daily saint quotes directly to your phone in inbox or SMS. We give wallpapers to remember what prayers we're doing. We give ebooks inside. There is so much going on inside of Catholic Gentleman Plus. Again, best way to support us. Please head over to CatholicGentlemanPlus.com. Pick yours up today. Keep us in your prayers. You are in ours. God bless.
What about tumultuous life changes, like a career transition or welcoming a new child into the house or moving your family like you did from Michigan? My wife's from West Bloomfield, so there was a connection.
I grew up there too. Yeah.
So great. So, but to New York, right? Like, how do you keep your frame of mind in controlling your thoughts when insecurities might set in because there's just such a new life change?
Well, part of it is to realize that there will be life changes and there will be disruption, and we're going to have different emotions about that, and that's okay. You know, I mean, we can have anxiety or stress at different points in our lives, but being able to be aware of that and understand why that is. I might be, you know, struggling with emotion because I've got a child that's keeping me up at night every night, and I'm up and I'm tired. You know, but just recognizing I'm going to do the very best I can. That's part of it. But even, you know, a lot of times we have emotions and we don't know why.
Yes.
I mean, I don't know if it's ever happened to you where you're like, gosh, I'm really down. I don't even know why.
Absolutely.
But to take the time in that space and say, well, how would you define if you had a word? I have this conversation sometimes with my kids. They're like, oh, I'm really down. I'm like, oh, well, give me a word. How do you feel? What's the word? Well, I'm sad. Okay, well, what is making you feel sad? I mean, we can have these kind of discussions with ourselves to kind of think about what those underlying things are. But we're going to have disruptions. Going back to your point. Yeah. I mean, I remember when we moved from Michigan to New York and then moved back from New York to Michigan, and it was very disruptive and very stressful. And it was a period, but I continued the discipline of the daily focus and so forth. And that really helped. So it's a recognition partly of just what we're going through at a particular time.
Excellent. So talk to me about your own discernment, because you were a lawyer and then you started a company and you sold a company and then you moved to, I mean, these are big decisions. You've welcomed 6 kids into your life. I mean, these are huge decisions. So talk to me a little bit about your career discernment, because I know that in the men and women that I coach or I mentor, there's always this, we go back to this fixed mindset of like, it's all going to fail. If I do something, and then that keeps them from doing something, it keeps them from moving forward. So I'd love to hear a little bit about your discernment when you went from starting a company, selling a company, changing to be such a prominent and prestigious position here with Dale Carnegie.
Well, again, I appreciate the question. And I'll tell you that some of this is hindsight, right? Because we grow and mature. So when I left the law, I could be wrong, I was 28, 29, something like that. Excuse me, I went into business. I started my first company around 32, and then sold that at around 37. So all along the way, there were different experiences that are forming me. When I started my first company, and we had 9/11, and it was just a traumatic time for the country, and it was a traumatic time for our business, and I was worried that we might not make it, and we made it through. And part of what I learned in that experience, it gave me confidence. And so ultimately, as I've gone through different experiences in my life, I've gained more confidence and more competence just because of the experience, right? And so I think that shapes it. But when I first made the decision to leave law and go into business, I was very nervous about it. And you spend a lot of time from high school to college to law school. I had a vision of being a lawyer, joining a big firm. I did that. I was on a track that I think would have led me to partner, and my goal at that time was making a lot of money. And when I realized after taking the Dale Carnegie course, again, this course was pivotal because it really challenged me my vision. And when I made the decision to leave the law, I was very nervous. I was like, number one, is anyone going to value my legal background in business? Lawyers have a view that this is all I can do. I've been trained as a lawyer. I'm a lawyer, once a lawyer, always a lawyer. I have many friends who are lawyers who are not super happy 30 years ago. They're still lawyers today. But it was nervous. I had a mentor who said to me, because I got this great job offer, and I told him I was nervous about it. He said, look, there were two things he said. One is, I always butcher this quote, but it was, it's not the smooth seas that make the sailor a great sailor. It's the rocky seas, the rough seas. The worst thing that happens, he said, is you could always come back into law. So And I never looked back. Going back to that first point, the things I was worried about really weren't things to worry about. I mean, I believe God provides, and my faith is an important part of who I am. And I've had a lot of trust. So even now, as I look at the future, I'm excited about the future. I don't know, none of us know day to day, hour to hour but I have trust.
Yeah.
And I think that's true when we're at a point of career transition, particularly if we've discerned it.
Yes.
Talk to our spouse or significant others about it and family about it, prayed on it. We go in a direction, and if things don't work out the way that we want, we keep on moving.
Yeah.
And if they work out the way in my experience, they've always worked out better than I've ever imagined. I never imagined that I'd be leading Dale Carnegie. This is such a spectacular company, and I really believe it's a gift and an honor and a responsibility that I take so seriously every single day.
Yeah.
And but I couldn't have asked for that for myself. And so that's part of where I just think, sometimes you take that first step, and it leads to incredible places.
Amen. My life echoes that. I used to be a professional trumpet player, and then I turned out to be a vice president of marketing. Now I'm a chief marketing officer running a men's ministry. I mean, it's just all God's abundance, right, that shares with it. I would like to shift. We talked about relationships, and that is one of the core pillars here. It's actually one of the core pillars of the Catholic gentleman. So for me, it's always self-mastery, right, which we're just talking about here. It is relationships, and it's the spiritual life. So I'd like to dive into relationships with you and talk about the importance of honing our relationship skills and working on them. I'd love for you to just take that in whatever direction you feel so inspired to talk about, because we have to get this right. And as you mentioned earlier, we're so divided these days. And so how do we work on those skills?
Well, the first thing I think it is to recognize is how important relationships are in our lives. A lot of times, I think we can think to ourselves that they're not that important and so forth, but the reality is that we're in connection with other people. We live in connection, whether it's in our family or our community or in our work. And, we are interacting with people, and we can interact in a positive way and develop positive, trusting, strong, enduring relationships and friendships, or maybe not so much. We could be the source of conflict. We could be the source of dissension and stress. And so, from there's a practical standpoint, there's a religious standpoint. From a practical standpoint, I think the most successful people in life are often those who are really good in relationship. If I want to have a successful, thriving marriage, there's things I need to work on in myself to be a good husband and a good father. And if I'm going to be an effective leader in business, it's the same principle. So on the other hand, we've got people many times who get to a certain level of their career and they can't advance because they're just not adept at dealing with people. And maybe sometimes they lack the interpersonal skills. We see this in Dale Carnegie all the time, where they're an IT person, they're an engineer, they're an accountant, whatever they are, and I'm not trying to stereotype any particular industries, but those are the ones where people often come to me and say, hey, generally speaking, how do and their careers open up once they learn the skills. And this is the good thing, John. I think all of us could learn the skills of building strong relationships. The Dale Carnegie principles, and going to Dale Carnegie, no one knew how to create thriving relationships like Dale Carnegie. No. That's why How to Win Friends and Influence People has been a best-selling book for 89 consecutive years, one of the best-selling books ever written.
Yeah.
So it is because he has defined and understood some core principles in human interaction that if we follow those things, we can build really effective relationships.
Yeah, having read How to Win Friends and Influence People a couple times, just on its face value, it might seem manipulative, because that's how it could be phrased as the intent. But really, it's not that at all. When you go into it, it's all about learn to be a good listener, like basically be a better human. And this is going to build relationships. And so I'd love for you to talk about things like trust or, listening and some of these skills, and how individuals that might not come by them naturally, maybe they didn't have parental figures that help them or siblings that help them. Where would you start with an individual like that?
Well, let me just back up to something you said, because I know that sometimes people will talk about manipulation. And I recently had Guy Fieri on my podcast.
Great.
And he talks about his life before he read Dale Carnegie, How to Win Friends, and afterwards. And he said, it's not about manipulation, it's about consideration. Dale Carnegie made this point himself, that when people are false, when they are trying to put on a front and so people see through that. And what his principles are all about is authentic, sincere, relationship with other people. It's about he says it's about a new and a different way of life. So that's really what it is that we teach.
Joe Hart revealing the surprising parallels between leading organizations and guiding our family. If you want more from the Catholic gentleman, easy to find when you go to EWTN.com/podcast and just hang out. I'm Ace McKay, bugging out for the rest of the week, but enjoy and remember to let God define who you are. I'll see you again with Catholics Coast to Coast.